Skyrocketing petrol subsidy payment, which remains a drain on the economy, as well as foreign exchange volatility, has continued to cause a strain on government's revenue generation strategy, leading to seemingly unbridled borrowing and rising debt costs, which exceeded the country's revenue by as much as 310 billion naira in the first quarter of this year. Well, let's just get talking about this, and I'm being joined by co-founder and CEO of Budget. Joins us from the United States, Mr. Seun Onigbinde. Thank you so much for your time. Well, it's worrisome. We need to get straight to this discussion. But first, the NNPC, going by market trends, is all about the only operator at the moment bringing in PMS and getting effects from the CBN. Shouldn't we have a leveled playing ground for petroleum importers to also access FX and, of course, be able to bring in products at this particular time?
Has always been there. And I think from Budget, based on research understanding and how the fuel subsidy issue undermines our fiscal structure, we have been unequivocal that fuel subsidy should be removed. So that's our first position, because we understand that the governance structure around the subsidy opens it up significantly to corruption and to abuse. And then Nigeria should have just instituted a structure of making payments to those who are most vulnerable to the shocks of increase, to a possible shocking increase in price. But for your question, I will say that the fundamental problem that I see is that it's an FX management issue that CBN is trying to do. Let's not forget that NNPC gets 445,000 barrels daily that he uses to swap for crude. So you will see that most times, I know most times NNPC is even allotting those the 445,000, they give it to different marketers or different producers to produce or to offtake, and they take those crude and they bring in refined petroleum for them. Those 445,000 barrels are not free. NNPC still pays the federation account for them, but most times NNPC has not been able to fully account for that payment because it says that the subsidy payments that is meant to recoup is using those payments to finance it. So it's a very, very complex thing. And I know that the first challenge we get there is that because NNPC is using a direct swap mechanism, it doesn't put a lot of burden on CBN when it comes to exchange, to FX demand. And it's also because of the abuse in the system in the previous past. So I understand if the CBN makes a decision to make it difficult for private marketers to access FX. I know a lot of marketers still access it. They still find a way to get FX, maybe with a premium rate, a parallel market rate. And somehow they still make those claims and still get their subsidy back. But I know the challenge is that based on the realities that we don't have enough dollars to go around. That's just the challenge. CBN might claim to have $30 to $38 billion in reserves. But reality is that the CBN has not been deploying those reserves to define the currency in a significant way. So maybe that needs to be significantly interrogated. But I know that based on the current structure of what happens within crude swaps, NNPC and CBN, it looks like the arrangement just works perfectly for them.
That operators are required to make, of course, operational payments. I spoke to some DAPMA members, to Nigerian Ports Authorities and NIMASA, for incoming cargoes and charters within Nigeria in dollars. Marketers are paying as much as twice as much they have to pay because of FX being sourced from parallel market. Should they be making these payments? Should the NPA and NIMASA not obey government directives that operations in Nigeria be denominated in Naira to ease liquidity challenges in the sector?
I don't even agree for these payments in the first place. I mean, while we are trying to get finished petrol products to the citizens at the BRS minimum price possible. So why does it have to be subject to custom duties? Why does it have to subject to the master cost? Why does it have to subject to, maybe NPA could take a little bit to maintain its infrastructure, but there are other products that are non-crude, non-fuel products that are also shipped through those terminals. NPA can direct its total revenues to those things, in some sort of way. So we could have, I mean, it's like government is giving and government is taking. If at the end of the day, they also don't even have to pay in dollars, you make it, it makes it difficult. In fact, look, it's just a clear understanding that you're losing faith in the currency itself. If you put this to IOCs to do so, yes. But if these are domestic marketers, that is very, very wrong policy. And I think the government, the federal government, the CBN, has to look significantly into it. We don't have a proper exchange rate management system. That's why we fritter so much on what the CBN is not even what the CBN does not need to spend them on. I mean, CBN is involved in almost every retail payments, BTAs, PTAs, school fees, medical fees. I mean, what's the business of the CBN with that? If you want things like that, you go and meet your bank, so that you can appropriate FX for things that are much more important. This is not the Nigeria of 2011, of 2012, or 2010. This is Nigeria of 2022. We don't have enough FX, even when we should have so much FX at this point. Considering the crude oil prices, we can still pump at maximum capacity in terms of production. So there are some adjustments that have to be made. But to hear that marketers are paying government agencies in FX is ludicrous. It's something that has to be stopped immediately. And I think those charges shouldn't even exist in the first place. Yeah.
Let's now talk about painting an apt picture of opportunity cost we have had to make as a nation, considering how much has been committed to subsidy payments compared to the impact it could have made in critical sectors, of course, like health, education, security, and infrastructure development.
No, when we look at that, you look at us, we spent close to 15 trillion naira, on subsidy in the last 10 years. Yes. And it's a pain because at the end of the day, we have not even spent as much as that on construction of road at the federal level. Even if you add to some state, you would find out that we have not even spent onto that. We have not even invested that in the education system. We have not invested that size of amount of money, capital investment, either in the education system or in the health sector. The reality is that when we were using revenues, there's a problem with using crude oil revenues to fund consumption. There's a huge problem there because number one, you can look at it from an intergenerational equity perspective. This crude does not belong to people of this generation alone. We should invest crude revenues in things that other generations, subsequent generations can benefit from. But we have even first lost the argument. But I can even understand if you're using current revenues to pay for fuel subsidies. Now, what I don't understand is that when we now decide to start borrowing and paying, using that to pay for fuel subsidy, when we decide to take money from the CBN, and using that to pay for fuel subsidy, or when we decide to now use savings, either in excess crude account, and use that to pay for fuel subsidy. Now, those are things that are preposterous, that do not make any economic sense at any point. There's understanding that fuel subsidy removal might and would, let's be honest with ourselves, to increase the fuel prices. But it's also an opportunity for Nigeria to be the social contract. Nigeria should be able to gather a proper list of those who are going to be most vulnerable to shocks in fuel prices and find compensation for them. There's no reason why also this cannot be an opportunity for us to rejuvenate the entire public transport system. If that means that more people would go by public transport system than go by their vehicle. So you have one person or like you have 100 cars on the road, and just one person is just inside that car and he doesn't have an opportunity to get a decent, clean vehicle to move them around. Those are the issues, those are the conversations. So until we sit back as a people and ask ourselves, what do we want to do differently? This issue will continue to be there. And like I say, we can no longer afford fuel subsidy. Nigeria can no longer afford it. And the reality is that the better the government communicates that, the faster for us. The other issue there is trust. Government is removing fuel subsidy. If you're asking me to take a bigger burden for the removal of fuel subsidy, are you showing an example that you are also living, a much more conservative lifestyle? If government still drives a 50 cars convoy, say have government still running presidential jets, if the president or anybody in government office flies out of the country for medical check, and at the expense of of the public. All of that things cannot elicit trust, for people to say go and remove subsidy, because definitely this is going to have an outsized effect on consumer prices. So it's very, very clear that this is an opportunity to build trust. This is an opportunity to build a social contract. This is an opportunity to expand social protection. And this is an opportunity for us to say, let us take out this subsidy. The only difference you can make is that you can also keep a fixed exchange rate. And since the NPC is even mostly swapping the crude in a way, you can have much more control and more feasibility of that regime to be sure that the prices are not out of reach. So it's something that the federal government can do. But I think at this point, we can no longer afford it. And that's why you have seen that our debt is ballooning every single day, because if you do the math properly, we're technically either taking money from the CBN or technically undermining NNPC from fully functioning as a state oil company to continue this lifestyle that we can't afford.
Okay, let's wrap up on this. So it's going to be a two-in-one question now to wrap up this conversation. Interesting conversation, I must tell you. Now, considering smuggling of PMS across borders and this unending issues with availability, what should we expect if there's a full deregulation of the downstream? And of course, issues around crude theft. What do you think that technology can do in playing a role to address the situation? Or what will you recommend?
So two things. First, on the smuggling, it's a policing issue. It's an institutional issue. I mean, the borders of this country, we have multiple borders, but there are also very clear points where most of these things move through. Tankers in barges, in small gallons, or in huge gallons. Some of those things are not, I think smuggling is right, but I don't think that is what is changing the dynamic significantly. And I don't think we are out of capacity to resolve it. It's if we really want to tackle things from an intelligence perspective, there's no point where if the customs is not effective enough, there's no reason why we can't put the DSS to it and give us much more accurate intelligence around the smuggling routes for these things. That's number one. Number two is the incentive for smuggling. If petrol is 200 or 185 naira per liter in Nigeria and it's 400 naira or 600 naira across the border, then definitely the element for the incentive for smuggling will not go away. So those are the kind of questions we need to put to ourselves. And we can also put all of these things. What is the consumption rate of border communities? How many tankers should go there? On a periodic basis. Those are the conversations with how much intelligence can we put into tracking of those tankers that go there? How much intelligence can we put around those places? And how do we empower customs and put a much more stronger mandate for them to stop? But I don't even think that's the bigger question, is to remove the incentive, because we know we protested this thing in 2012 where we said fuel subsidy removal. And we thought this is going to be the end of the situation. Yeah, maybe that time we could even afford it, but now we can't afford a fuel subsidy anymore, because if you look at government revenues, we have government revenues around 4.5 trillion naira. We're spending around 13 to 14 trillion naira. With this year, we are going to have our deficit is going to be higher than public revenues. So what are we trying to look for? There's an error in the host sector that we need to ask ourselves this hard question. And on the crude oil theft, number one, it's also a systemic and institutional issue. And as you can see, it's a finger-pointing situation. We have the private security of the government saying it is the military. You have the military says government institutions are involved. You have other government institutions says IOCs are involved. IOCs are saying it is the communities that are involved. Everybody's pointing fingers to say this is who is responsible for the crude oil theft. But the first thing is that we need to accelerate the implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act. There's a significant clause there that mandates communities to protect pipelines within them in exchange for some sign of payment. And people are going to be responsible for that. This might be the opportunity for us to accelerate that kind of mechanism so that community are also owning this infrastructure and also get compensated for that. So this is the time for government to set up a framework to institutionalize the host community development project component of the Petroleum Industry Act. That's one. The second thing is that there has to be a systemic metering from the oil wellhead to the terminal point. Across the entire flow, there has to be some form of intelligence gathering about which are the break point mostly in this production? Where does the oil fluid pressure get much more lower? Where are we possibly going to find joints across all of this? So these are the intelligence. They can put their technologies, drone technologies, there are even technologies that around pipeline technologies that are well used even in Saudi Arabia and in different places to monitor oil pipelines. So we can't afford all of these things. It's just that Nigeria, as you will see with exchange rate racketeering, or as you will see with crude oil theft, or as you would see with even the first subsidy issue, why it has never gone away, is that there is a benefit market. There's an illicit benefit market around it. And that's why it will continue. And nobody's able to take the hard questions or the hard decisions to really be able to stop these things. So the government decides to step up and says, we want to sanitize this place. I want everybody in communities, IOCs, security officers, intelligence officers, private security networks, everybody is in an aggregate system where they are all monitoring from end to end and point to point, and everybody knows who's responsible at every point. Once the government is willing to offer that kind of conversation, I don't think we are ready to move. If you look at NMPC, how much they've spent on pipeline repairs and maintenance over the years due to code.
It's worrisome.
It is enough for them to guide the entire pipeline system. And I think those are the hard questions.
Interesting conversation. Mr. Shehu Onigbinde is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Budget Nigeria. Thank you so much. I would have a part 2 of this discussion so that we could actually touch on where we couldn't get to today. But I must thank you so much for your time all the same. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, then. He joined us from the United States of America.